Good morning. Our first reading is found in Deuteronomy 5:12-15. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, or your male or female slave, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Our psalm to read responsibly is found in chapter 81. Sing with the Lord to God our strength, and raise a loud shout to the God of Jacob.
Raise the sound of timbrel, the merry harp and the lyre.
Blow the ram's horn at the new moon, and at the full moon, the day of our feast.
For this is the statute for Israel, a law for the God of Jacob.
God laid it as a solemn charge upon Joseph going out over the land of Egypt, where I heard a voice I did not know.
I eased your shoulder from the burdens. Your hands were set free from the grave digger's baskets.
You called on me in trouble, and I delivered you. I answered you from the secret place of thunder and tested you at the waters of Meribah.
Hear, O my people, and I will admonish you. O Israel, if you would but listen to me.
There shall be no strange God among you. You shall not worship a foreign God.
I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it.
Our second reading is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 5-12. We do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you.
Our gospel this morning is Mark chapter 2, verse 23 through Mark chapter 3, verse 6. Glory to you, O Lord. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was the priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. And he gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Good morning. We work too hard. Not me personally. I'm done with seminary and now no longer being a full-time student. This job is pretty comfortable. But as a society, we work too hard. Last week I read an article in the Lincoln Journal-Star. It was a feel-good article for the most part. It was about a Lincoln High School student who had been accepted into 3 Ivy League schools, and that's great. Good for her. But there was one part in the middle of this article that talked about how she was feeling really nervous that she was going to get left behind by her choice colleges because she wasn't in the right activities. She didn't do enough activities. And you may be thinking, well, what was she doing in that time instead of being in activities? You know, maybe if she was just laying on her bed watching TikTok videos all day, maybe I can understand why she wouldn't get into the best colleges. Maybe if she was out being a menace to society with her friends, she shouldn't get into the best colleges. But that's not the case. She was working. She had a job. She had a job, and that's why she wasn't in the right activities. Imagine being under so much pressure that even working your job feels like a waste of time, like a distraction that's keeping you from doing the right things to be most competitive for getting into those colleges. I can understand why teenagers these days are so stressed and anxious. The amount of pressure they're on is such that even working a job feels like they're not doing enough. You can be in school all day, go to work after school, and that is not enough. Now, fortunately for her, it was enough. She wrote a really good essay, and that got her accepted into some colleges, but she also got plenty of rejection letters. And let's be clear, just applying for schools is kind of hard work in and of itself. Of course, when you have more than 30 hours worth of stuff that you're expected to do in a 24-hour period, everything feels like a waste of time. We're frantically running around trying to get everything in. We can't possibly get everything in. So, thank God for Sabbath. Thank God that God has given us a command to rest. Before we get into the gospel lesson proper, I want to talk about a few things about Sabbath. One, it should be acknowledged that we, in our modern society, can't really do Sabbath the way that it was intended in the Bible. The fact is, if we want people to stay alive, hospitals, power plants, and pharmacies probably need to stay open. Someone needs to be monitoring the people who are sick. Someone needs to be doing that. And that means there might not be a day when everyone can take a day off. Sometimes it is raining all week, and on the day that would be the Sabbath, that's your one day to get out into the fields. I understand if farmers have to go take that day. Sometimes it doesn't work to have a Sabbath exactly how it's intended. But then again, there's good biblical precedent for this. Nehemiah, when he was rebuilding Jerusalem, he really wanted to make sure the Sabbath law was being kept. So he made sure people were not buying and selling in Jerusalem on the Sabbath. How did he make sure? He posted a garrison of soldiers at the gate to make sure people couldn't come in. Now, he certainly stopped commerce on the Sabbath, but those soldiers did not get the day off. The fact is, not everyone can take the day off. That just is something that happens. That doesn't mean we should give up on it. Frankly, as a society, we would probably be better off if we did have a day where grocery stores, movie theaters, restaurants, the things that we don't need to be open all the time, were closed. People could take the day off, society could take a day off, and most of us could stay home and enjoy time with our family. That would be good. We could call it vicarious Sabbath, where the people who still have to go to work at hospitals and power plants, etc., they can kind of enjoy the fact that the world has gotten quieter for a day, and then they can take their rest on another day. Now, we might be wondering, what is the purpose of this rest in the first place? And this brings me to my second point that I want to get to about Sabbath. In a post-industrial revolution society, the value of things is often tied to its productivity, its utility. We rest so that we can work harder and more efficiently. Resting is a way of recharging the body and brain so that on Monday you can work better. But I don't think that's right. And the idea is quite pervasive. Me being a music teacher before I did this, and obviously also interested in music from elementary school through high school and college, I saw this a lot. There'd be these posters around the school talking about why teach music. And the reason you should teach music, at least some of the reasons, were it helps you with math and science. You should study music because somehow people who do music in high school score better on standardized tests in math. And if you're scoring better on standardized tests in math, that might mean you can get a good accounting job or engineering job and make more money than you would as a musician. The value of studying music is to make more money as an engineer because you're good at math. Why do we have little league teams that play baseball? Well, certainly it's to have fun, but oftentimes there's a little sneaky part in these advertisements where they say good teamwork building opportunities so that they can succeed later in life with their teamwork skills, with their cooperation. And we can almost imagine, why do we get our 7-year-olds playing these league games? Well, so that 30 years later, when they're sitting on a corporate marketing board, they're a good team player. But the truth is, sometimes we make music not to make money and not to be good at math. We make music simply because we love music. Sometimes little kids just need to hit a ball with a bat and run. And it has nothing to do with building skills for the corporate market business world. And sometimes we rest just because we want to go fishing, or take a Sunday stroll with our family through the park, or have a few drinks one evening with our friends. And it has nothing to do with recharging us so that we can work better. It is the rest itself that is important, not what the rest does to your working life. But then we get to this gospel, and Jesus' response almost throws a wrench in what I've just said. Jesus' disciples are going through a field and they're plucking grains, and it seems to be almost absent-minded. Maybe they're just gathering a few grains because they want a snack. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. But I also suspect that it does not really constitute work in a way that we understand it. Jesus could have looked at the Pharisees who are saying, "How can your disciples be doing work on the Sabbath?" He could have looked at them and said, "You're speaking truly like people who have never done an honest day's work in their lives." Jesus worked with his hands. He was a carpenter, which is probably different back then than how we understand carpenters today. But he probably worked on making frames for buildings. He probably worked on making boats for fishermen for the Sea of Galilee. He probably made carts and furniture and other things. Jesus worked hard in his professional life. He would probably be baffled by someone saying plucking grains while walking along the edge of a field is work. That is the equivalent of walking down a country lane and finding a raspberry bush or a mulberry tree and getting your fingers a little purple. It's not work. But that's not what he said. He didn't say, relax, guys, this isn't work. He said, humankind is not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for humankind. And we could almost imagine this being a workaholic's excuse to get some more work done. Because we could say, well, yeah, I could take the weekend off, but I'll take the overtime, make more money, and be closer to buying that new set of golf clubs, or whatever it happens to be. The way to get ahead, sure, it's nice that other people can take a break, but if I don't take a break, I'll be that much further ahead than everyone else when Monday comes along. I'll be that much farther ahead on payday when payday comes along. We could even, perhaps, imagine a nefarious boss using this line of reasoning to trick workers into working on their days off. Hey, you don't need to rest. You can come work, make a little bit more money. After all, the Sabbath is made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath, right? But just resting and recharging is not really the point of the Sabbath, I don't think. I don't think that's what the Old Testament shows. When the people of Israel are fleeing Egypt, the first time that they get manna, bread from heaven, it's an interesting arrangement. They're told to go out and gather it in the morning because once the sun hits it, it's all going to go away. So they got to get it in the morning. And they're only supposed to take enough for their household for one day. Some people take more, and they find the next morning the manna is rotten. It's full of worms. It smells awful. And they have to throw it out. It can't possibly be used. But on the sixth day of the week, they are told to take enough for 2 days. Which is crazy because every other day they tried this, they got rotten flour with worms. But on the sixth day, they're told to take extra. And the reason is because it won't be there on the Sabbath. They can't go out and gather on the Sabbath. And some of them don't listen, of course, and go hungry the next day. But the ones that do listen find that on the Sabbath, and on the Sabbath only, the manna is perfectly preserved. No worms, no stench, no rot. The pattern of the Sabbath week for the people harvesting manna was not about getting ahead in life. And it wasn't just about rest either. It wasn't terribly hard work to go out and grab enough manna to put into a basket and take home. It was about trusting God, knowing that God would provide. That when God said, take enough for 2 days, that would be exactly how much they needed and nothing would go wrong. And when God said, only take enough for today, that would be exactly how much they needed and the manna would show up the next day. Sabbath was an act of trust. It was a demonstration of faith, a reminder to the Israelites that they had a God who provided even when they took the day off, that things would be okay. I think Jesus knows that very well. Jesus understands that Sabbath is about trust. It's about faith. And that's why the last thing that Jesus says in that particular, the first story in this gospel lesson, recontextualizes what he says before. He had said the Sabbath is made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. But then he says, so the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. To be clear, you are not the Son of Man. Jesus is. You are not Lord of the Sabbath. Your boss is not Lord of the Sabbath. Whoever is convincing you to go to work extra is not Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is. And what Jesus is doing here, when he says that the Sabbath is made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath, and then he goes on to say that the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath, he's acknowledging that he is sort of the representative of humankind at this moment. Because let's be clear, we humans are not necessarily our own best advocates. Look at all the wars we fight. all the time. If it were up to us, we would ruin all the good gifts God gives us. But we can entrust it to Jesus, and Jesus can guide us. Jesus is the Lord over the Sabbath. It's not up for us to give away the Sabbath, ignore the Sabbath, or abuse the Sabbath, because it belongs to Jesus. And we can trust Jesus, that Jesus' work is enough. The good news is, the world does not keep spinning because our feet are running across it like it's some giant hamster wheel. The world doesn't need us to save it. The world already has a Savior. God will make the morning come tomorrow. God will provide for God's people today, tomorrow, and for the rest of time. God will watch over the world and protect it and preserve it. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't work, but it does mean that we don't need to frantically pursue work all the time in our efforts to get ahead or save the world or save ourselves or whatever it happens to be. So we can go ahead and turn off the laptop. Tell work that you cannot be bothered this weekend and unplug your phone battery. Take off your boots, put up your feet, grab your favorite drink, and turn on your favorite TV show. And just enjoy the day. Because we can remind ourselves, through our rest, that God's work is indeed enough. Thanks be to God.